Have you ever seen a lone survivor defy an armed gang after witnessing a brutal ambush of her entire wagon party? Our story follows Catherine Montrose, who barely escapes a massacre engineered to look like tribal warfare. Yet, from the moment she locks eyes with the outlaw leader, his scar and silver hat band catching the dawn light, she vows to see justice done. You'll meet the resourceful Dakota scout, Chayton, who steps into her path at the direst moment. Together, they forge an unlikely alliance to unravel the ruthless band's deception and stop further bloodshed. Curious how Catherine overcomes danger and betrayal with limited supplies and the trust of only a handful of new allies. Stick around to discover every twist and turn that leads to an unexpected resolution. In the meantime, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any gripping story updates or future heroic tales. Ready to find out how Catherine's courage prevails? Let's begin. Catherine Montrose pressed a trembling hand to her bodice, feeling the rust-colored stains of her husband's dried blood crack on her fingertips. 3 days ago, she had been a hopeful traveler heading west. Now she was a lone survivor on the Dakota plains, stumbling over rough grass and muddy ruts in search of something, anything that might keep her alive. The wagon train she had joined, led by the Whitlock family and several other settlers, was ambushed at dawn. At dawn, leaving behind the kind of carnage that still haunted her with every breath. Catherine had been crouched behind a cluster of low bushes when the first gunshots tore through the morning hush. She remembered seeing men, white men, racing on horseback through the camp, brandishing rifles and pistols, shouting at each other in coarse English. Tattered bits of cloth that mimicked native dress dangled from their saddles, suggesting they wanted to blame the massacre on a tribe. But she, having watched from her vantage, knew precisely who they were. Bandits, killers who had used a false Indian disguise to sow chaos. Frozen by terror, Catherine pressed her face to the ground as she heard screams ring out across the plain. By the time silence returned, she was the only one who emerged from the carnage still breathing. Over those 3 days, Catherine's dark hair tangled around her cheeks. Her once decent traveling gown ripped at the hem and smeared with grime. A borrowed pistol, found among the wreckage, had exactly 1 bullet left. Her canteen had run dry sometime the previous afternoon, leaving her mouth as parched as the dusty grass. In a daze, she pressed on, praying she might stumble upon a trading post or a party of soldiers. Winter would come soon. If thirst or hunger didn't end her, the cold surely would. Late on the 3rd afternoon, a sliver of luck presented itself. She spotted a trickle of smoke on the horizon. Smoke meant warmth, possibly other human beings, and no matter who they were, Catherine felt compelled to seek them out. When she drew closer, however, an instinctive caution whispered through her mind. The settlement was small, a mere handful of wagons and a single smoky fire. A group of grim-faced men in buckskin jackets circled around the flames. Something in their raucous laughter made her pause, ducking behind a stand of tall grass for cover. The closer she crept, the more distinctly she heard references to loot from the wagons and foolish travelers. Her heart slammed in her chest. These were the men who had slaughtered her entire company. She started to back away, weighed down by a sudden rush of fear and hatred, when her foot snagged on a twisted root. She fell against a broad tree trunk, dislodging a cluster of raindrops from the low canopy overhead. One of the bandits froze mid-sentence, pivoting to look in her direction. Catherine's lungs went tight, her mind screaming at her to run, but her muscles refused to move. A bearded man cursed and stalked toward her hiding place, pistol half lifted. An arrow's whistle sliced through the heavy air. The bandit jerked in surprise, an arrow shaft protruding from his chest. He fell forward with a choked gasp, scattering dead leaves with his final convulsion. The other outlaws erupted in confusion, some diving behind crates, others returning fire at an unseen assailant. Gunshots thundered across the clearing. Catherine flattened herself against the trunk, eyes squeezed shut as bark dug into her cheek. In the chaos, a strong arm clamped around her waist, and a calloused palm muffled her startled cry. She was hauled backward through the undergrowth, away from the swirling mayhem. When they had put enough distance between themselves and the gunfire, the stranger released her. Catherine turned, knife in hand, to face a tall figure dressed in a combination of native and frontier garments. A fringed shirt, belted trousers, and a wide-brimmed hat shading his sharp features. A bow was slung across his back, alongside a European-made rifle. "They are the killers of your people," he said, each word tinted with an accent that was neither fully American nor fully Dakota. "If you want to live, come with me." His expression was wary but not hostile, as if he weren't entirely sure of her reaction. Catherine swallowed, nodding slowly. She didn't have the strength to argue or the courage to remain near that bandit camp. Whatever lay ahead could hardly be worse than the fate awaiting her if she fell back into the hands of men who had murdered her husband and friends. Still clutching her borrowed knife, she let the stranger lead her deeper into the wilderness, the echo of gunfire trailing behind them. They moved until her legs threatened to collapse beneath her. Only then did the stranger pause, scanning the horizon to ensure no one followed. He pointed toward a shallow ravine bordered by a scattering of rocks. "There," he murmured, guiding her into the depression. Catherine practically fell to her knees, sagging against a smooth boulder. Her companion knelt as well, still clutching his bow with the reflexive readiness of a man expecting danger at every turn. When her breathing slowed, Catherine looked up into a pair of steady, dark eyes. He touched his chest, speaking in halting English. "Chayton Snowhawk, that's my name. The men who attacked your Wagon. At the Massacre. White men," he clarified, "pretending to be Indians. I found the site. I saw your tracks, followed you." She realized he must have seen her husband's body. The thought sliced through her, and she fought to control a tremor in her voice. "I'm Catherine Montrose. I was with the Whitlock party. All gone now, except me." Her voice caught on the last syllable, and for a moment emotion overwhelmed her. The stranger, Chayton, did not speak. He merely inclined his head, acknowledging her loss with an understated solemnity. "Those men, they wore feathers and beaded scraps, trying to pin the blame on your people," Catherine whispered. "I don't know why. It seems they want the army to come after the Dakota." Chayton nodded, his expression grim. "They've raided our villages too, left white objects behind. Soldiers blame us for attacks. My father," he hesitated, eyes flickering with a grief she recognized. "He died trying to make them listen." The quiet resentment in his tone resonated with her own fury. Perhaps that mutual pain was what spurred him to help. Catherine felt a rush of gratitude and an edge of fear. She was relying on a man whose culture she barely understood, and whose people had every reason to despise outsiders. Yet here he was, risking his life to pull her away from the bandits' camp. In the fading dusk, he rummaged through a leather pouch, pulling out a small flask of water and some strips of dried meat. "Drink, eat," he said, handing them to her. "No fire tonight. Danger is close." She sipped greedily, the water feeling like salvation. The dried meat was gamey, possibly venison or buffalo, but she no longer cared. Hunger forced her to tear at it with her teeth until her jaws ached. When she finished, she slumped against the rock, exhaustion washing over her like a suffocating blanket. For the first time in days, her adrenaline ebbed enough to let her body fully register its bruises, cuts, and raw blisters. Catherine tried to remain awake, but the combination of safety and fatigue proved overpowering. Her head drooped, eyes drifting shut. Sometime in the night, she woke to find Chayton sitting at the ravine's edge, arrow-notched, scanning the darkness. Every so often, a distant cry, coyote or nightbird, broke the silence, but no sign of pursuit reached their hidden spot. By first light, she stirred to find him still alert, though a bone-deep weariness clung to the set of his shoulders. He offered her another sip from his flask, then gestured for her to stand. "We must go. More men might come. You can walk?" She nodded, though every fiber of her being screamed with pain. Gritting her teeth, she stumbled to her feet, determined not to appear weak. They headed north. Catherine learned that Chayton believed the bandits were holed up in a remote hideout near a small trading post. For days, he had been tracking them alone, collecting proof that these raids were not tribal warfare, but the work of ruthless marauders. "They call me traitor if I bring word to army," he said, mouth twisted in a wry grimace. "But if we don't show truth, many more will die." She studied him sidelong. "Why me? Why save me?" His gaze flicked her way. "Because I could and you needed help," he said simply. "I was not sure you'd survive the plains alone. And you saw them kill your people. You can speak truth." It struck her how a single event, this brutal ambush, had intertwined their fates. She was an outsider, yes, but her eyewitness account might prove vital to halting the false narrative fueling violence on the frontier. He was Dakota, straddling a line between two worlds. Together, perhaps they could do more than survive. Perhaps they could expose a conspiracy. Midway through the second day of walking, the terrain shifted subtly. The rolling plains gave way to gentle hills, dotted with clusters of stunted pines. Chayton's pace remained relentless, yet methodical. He paused occasionally, crouching to study tracks in soft earth or broken twigs. Catherine wished she possessed such skills. To her untrained eye, everything looked the same. A vast expanse of grass and shrubs. "What do you see?" she asked, halting behind him when he knelt beside a faint hoofprint. Chayton touched the print lightly. Two riders, maybe a day ahead. Horses shod. White men. He looked over his shoulder. "They're circling north like us. Could be bandits scouting, or travelers. We must be careful." She nodded. The notion of more run-ins with outlaws tightened her stomach into knots. By the time they reached a small, trickling creek just after noon, her feet were throbbing and her lips cracked with thirst. Chayton filled a worn water skin, handing it to her. She drank, reminding herself not to gulp too greedily. He dipped his hat into the water and let the droplets course through his black hair, revealing faint lines of tension across his brow. They followed the creek's bank, the water lapping at their boots. Catherine's dress, torn almost to her knees, clung to her legs. She had stripped away the underskirts for easier movement, an unthinkable act back east, but an absolute necessity in the wilderness. After an hour, they came upon a secluded stand of birch trees. Chayton motioned for silence, then stepped forward with deliberate caution. She heard a soft whinny, two horses tethered in the shade, lathered with sweat. Nearby, a man's voice cursed from behind a bush. Catherine held her breath, adrenaline spiking. Chayton gestured for her to stay put, but she edged closer, unable to quell her curiosity. The man's voice rose again, accompanied by rustling. Another voice barked an irritated reply. A wave of panic surged through her. Were these bandits? Chayton lowered his body behind a fallen log, arrow poised. Catherine crouched next to him, heart hammering. Through the leaves, she glimpsed two ragged men rummaging through saddlebags, each clutching a rifle. Their worn boots and rough manner suggested the same breed of lawless types that had attacked the wagons. She bit down on her lip, recalling the face of that bearded killer who boasted about the good haul. "Only two," Chayton breathed, eyes narrowed. "We can go around or confront them." She swallowed. "If they're part of the gang, they may lead us to their hideout. But if they see me—" She couldn't finish the sentence, picturing the gruesome aftermath. Chayton weighed the risk. "Better we avoid, unless forced. Too dangerous for you." Catherine's pride flared at his gentle condescension, but she recognized his logic. They had only a handful of bullets and no guarantee these men would show mercy or talk. Fleeing seemed the wiser option. They painstakingly retraced their steps, leaving the birch grove as quietly as they had come. A swirl of relief and lingering anxiety churned in Catherine's chest. They continued northward, forging a circuitous path to circumvent the armed men. By late afternoon, the sun glowered from overhead, casting long shadows. Catherine longed for a moment of respite. Finally, Chayton slowed near a rocky bluff. He pointed out a narrow cleft in the stone. "Good for shelter," he said. "We'll rest, then decide next steps." Inside the bluff, they found a cramped shelter. It smelled faintly of pine resin and damp earth. Chayton started a tiny fire, just enough to warm their cold meal of dried meat. Catherine couldn't stop replaying the day's events in her mind. The near encounter with two men, the paranoid glances over her shoulder every time she heard a rustling in the tall grass. She was no longer just a frightened widow. She was becoming hardened, alert to every snap of a twig, every shift of wind. After the meal, she ventured to the bluff's entrance, gazing at the pastel sky. She pictured her old life, the comfortable home in Pennsylvania, the tidy parlor, her mother's stern lectures on propriety. That life felt more distant than ever. She had witnessed horrors, grown used to the idea of traveling alone with a Dakota guide. No one from her old world could have conceived of the transformations these weeks had wrought. Catherine returned to the dying embers. Chayton was sorting his limited arrows, checking each for damage. "You said you found my wagon site," she ventured. "Did you see any sign of Robert, my husband?" He paused. "I saw many dead. Took what I could for clues." A ring, maybe his. I buried the bodies left and open. Couldn't bury all. Pain lanced her chest, though she managed a quiet thank you. Hearing of his small act of respect brought tears to her eyes, tears she refused to shed. She had to stay strong. With the last light fading, Catherine wrapped her arms around her knees, flinching when the wind echoed with a distant howl. Somewhere out there, the killers lurked. She could only hope, by traveling with this fierce and watchful companion, they might elude the threat until they figured out how to expose the truth. Dawn arrived gray and unwelcoming, a veil of low-hanging clouds promising rain. Catherine and Chayton emerged from the bluff, scanning the horizon for signs of movement. The plains unfurled in a desolate sweep of muted colors, the wind bending tall grass and rippling waves. Reluctantly, they packed up their few belongings, Chayton's bow, the borrowed pistol, a water flask nearly empty, and set out once more. They had been heading north for days, guided by Chayton's vague plan to reach a safer region where friendly tribes sometimes traded with an agent he trusted. Catherine gleaned that this agent was stationed at a frontier outpost, perhaps a small fort or trading station. Yet the details were uncertain. Every day they traveled, she marveled at how little she truly knew about this land. In Philadelphia, she had learned about etiquette and needlework, not how to survive in a wilderness where predators walked on both 2 legs and 4. By mid-morning, the clouds opened, a chilly downpour soaking them within minutes. Catherine's hair plastered to her scalp as they trudged through mud that threatened to swallow her boots. She lost track of how many times she slipped. Her shin banged a stone in the muck, sending fiery pain up her leg. She bit her lip hard, determined not to slow their progress with complaints. From the set of his jaw, she suspected Chayton was equally weary, yet he pressed on. Hours later, the rain eased, though the sky remained overcast. A wisp of smoke drifted on the horizon, a new camp or settlement. Catherine's heart thudded, recalling the last time she glimpsed smoke. Was it more bandits? Soldiers? Settlers? Without exchanging words, they both angled wide, giving the unknown smoke a wide berth to avoid stumbling into a lethal situation. Late in the afternoon, they paused for a meager meal of dried berries and a rabbit Chayton shot. Catherine tried not to recoil as he dressed the rabbit, reminding herself this was survival, not a parlor dinner. After the flesh was skewered over a tiny fire, she forced down each bite. Despite the unseasoned taste, it was the first warm meal she'd had since the massacre. As dusk gathered, they found a hollow protected by a ring of stones. Chayton cleared away debris and built a concealed fire pit. While waiting for the flames to settle, Catherine dared to ask the question burning in her mind. What's the plan once we find this agent or outpost? Will anyone believe me? The official reports claim Indians attacked the Whitlock train. Chayton stared into the low flames. Some men want to believe that. It's simpler. Fear sells, but if you speak strongly, present details only the real killers would know. It may force them to investigate. My people have also lost many, blamed for raids that were not ours. She twisted her fingers together, remembering how powerless she had felt when those disguised marauders slaughtered everyone around her. I'll speak, I promise, but I'm scared. She closed her eyes. They killed so many. They'll kill again unless we stop them. A flicker of empathy crossed Chayton's face. Fear can guide us or freeze us. We keep moving. In that moment, she recognized the heavy burden he bore. If she failed to convince the outpost authorities, more bloodshed might follow. Dakota villages attacked by misguided soldiers, settlers on edge and prone to violence. He was banking on her testimony to prove a conspiracy. The magnitude of that responsibility turned her anxiety to steel. If her survival could save innocent lives, then she had no choice but to see it through. That night, as the fire died down and the wind hissed across the stony ground, Catherine lay on a makeshift bed of pine boughs, replaying every detail of the massacre in her mind. For once, she didn't try to shut out the memories. She studied them, memorized them, determined to remember every word the killer said. If the time came to speak, she would not falter. They woke to find wolf tracks in the wet earth near their camp, a stark reminder of the ever-present threats lurking in the frontier. Chayton crouched beside the prince, frowning. Smaller pack, but close. Catherine shivered, imagining yellow eyes watching from just beyond her line of sight. She wrapped her arms around herself, keeping step as they trudged away from the site. By midday, the land began sloping upward. Clusters of pine and spruce hinted at higher elevations ahead. The grass gave way to stony ground and shallow rivulets trickling through narrow draws. Chayton led them into a rocky defile where the wind howled like a wounded animal. Catherine stumbled against a jagged outcrop, wincing. Her feet, raw and swollen, rebelled at each new step, but pressing on was their only option. After several more hours, they emerged into a small clearing. A natural spring bubbled from beneath a moss-covered boulder, forming a clear pool. With grateful sighs, they both knelt to refill canteens and splash the cold water on their sweaty faces. Catherine peeled off her sodden boots to check the damage. Blisters wept on her heels. She bit her gum, tears of frustration threatening. "Let me see," Chayton said, surprising her with his gentleness. He crouched, examining the wounds. "Need to clean," he declared. Fetching a small pouch from his belt, he crushed an herb into a milky paste. Dakota medicine should help heal. She was stunned by the kindness in his dark gaze as he applied the paste. The stinging eased almost instantly. "Thank you," she managed, voice catching with emotion she'd tried so hard to stifle. He rose without comment, scanning the clearing. A breeze rustled overhead, stirring pines that whispered like gossiping ghosts. "We stay here tonight," he finally said. "Safer than traveling after dark. Wolves or bandits." That evening, as Chayton constructed a low fire, Catherine found a moment to wash some of the grime from her face. She removed her travel-worn gown to her chemise, modesty overshadowed by practicality, and rinsed the filth away in the spring. The cold water took her breath, but afterward she felt marginally human again. She was just redressing when a twig snapped behind her. Catherine tensed, hand flying to the knife. A man in filthy buckskin stepped into the clearing, rifle drawn. He blinked, clearly startled to see a woman. Then his cracked lips twisted into a predatory grin. "Well, look at that," he sneered, eyes raking over her. "Ain't every day you find a lost filly in the woods." Fear clawed up her spine. "Stay back," she ordered, brandishing her knife. The man chuckled, leveling his rifle. Before he could speak again, another shape exploded out of the shadows. Chayton, arrow-nocked, aimed at the intruder's chest. The buckskin stranger startled. "What in tarnation in it?" he began, but it ended in a strangled cry as he jerked away. A shot rang out, wild, missing Chayton by inches. Catherine dove to the ground, heart thunderous. In one fluid motion, Chayton's arrow flew, lodging in the man's shoulder. "How many with you?" Chayton demanded, but the intruder collapsed, cursing and howling. Blood soaked his jacket. He spat a wad of crimson onto the ground, then glared at them, rage in his eyes. "You'll both be dead soon." "My pals are near," he growled, eyes rolling. Catherine exchanged a look with Chayton, alarm pounding in her chest. If more were coming, they had little time. "We can't stay," she urged, adrenaline surging. Chayton hesitated. "We can't let him go free. He'll lead them." The wounded man groaned, lips peeled back in a cruel sneer. "They'll track my blood anyway, savage. Best run. You'll be dog meat by morning." Catherine trembled. She didn't want to kill him in cold blood, but letting him live was equally dangerous. Chayton's expression hardened, internal conflict plain in his eyes. Ultimately, he swung his bow back over his shoulder. "Tie him," he said firmly, "then we leave." They bound the man's hands behind his back, ignoring his string of vile threats. Chayton shoved a rag into the man's mouth to silence his curses. Catherine's heart felt like a pounding drum, guilt and relief tangling in her chest. Snatching their packs, they fled the clearing, forging a new path deeper into the pines. The spring, the small bit of comfort it offered, was lost. Their newly found respite had crumbled. Rain began to fall once more, cold spears pricking her already battered skin. She fought back tears, furious that every step toward rest was stolen by the presence of savage criminals who thrived on torment. Yet a flicker of grim determination sparked within her. She had survived the massacre. She'd learned from Chayton's stoicism. She refused to break now. Beneath the sopping folds of her dress, she felt the handle of the borrowed pistol pressing into her thigh, and she prayed they would find the rumored outpost soon, or else muster the strength to keep running. At dawn, they emerged from the pines onto a high ridge that afforded a sweeping view of the plains. Clouds hung heavy in the eastern sky, but a faint glow hinted at the rising sun. Down below, the land stretched for miles, rolling hills, patchy groves, winding streams. In the far distance rose a palisade and clusters of buildings. Catherine's pulse quickened. A fort or settlement? Chayton's brow furrowed. That is Fort Redfield, he said, voice low with a note of tension. Army post near the boundary. Many soldiers, possibly your best chance to speak, but also dangerous for me. White soldiers blamed Dakota for raids. Catherine stared. That structure was her gateway to the law, to an official who might believe her story about the massacre. She imagined marching in, demanding to see the commanding officer, detailing every atrocity she had witnessed. Would they trust the word of a battered widow accompanied by a Dakota man? Perhaps not. Still, it was a lead. We can't approach unannounced, she reasoned. They might shoot you on sight. Chayton nodded. We find someone inside who listens. There is a man, Caldwell, an Indian agent. If he's here, he might help. But if not, he let the possibility hang in the crisp morning air. They spent the next hour skirting the higher ground, seeking a vantage. At last, they spotted a narrower route leading downhill toward a stand of cottonwoods. Smoke curled from cooking fires near the fort's perimeter. Soldiers patrolled along the walls, dark silhouettes pacing atop the palisade walkway. Catherine's heart hammered. She recalled her father's stories of frontier forts, brash men, often quick to blame tribes for every mishap. She also remembered that the army had posted bulletins stating the Whitlock train was destroyed by hostile Indians. Could she uproot that false narrative? They chose to hide in a cluster of boulders half a mile from the fort gates. Settling behind one, Chayton examined the fort through a small spyglass. Catherine pressed close, squinting to see. She glimpsed a parade ground, a few stables, a blockhouse. Soldiers milled about, some leading horses, others hauling crates. The place hummed with activity. If they see you as just another Dakota warrior, she murmured, they might detain or shoot before you explain. His expression grew taut. Yes, that's why you must go first. Ask for Caldwell. If he's there, you bring him out to meet me. I can hide and wait. She caught her breath, realizing she'd have to face the fort alone. What if I can't persuade them? They might not let me leave again. A line of concern etched across his brow. If that happens, you do what you can to correct the record. At least the truth is told. She stared at him, stunned by the finality in his voice. You'd sacrifice yourself? Chayton exhaled. I have no illusions about how the soldiers view me. If one life saves many, so be it. The heaviness of that statement weighed on her. She found her hands shaking. After everything they had endured, after he risked so much to keep her alive, walking into that fort alone felt like an abandonment, but there seemed no alternative. Wait for me at those rocky bluffs, she said, gesturing east. I'll come back, I promise. A ghost of a smile flickered across his lips. You have grown strong, Catherine Montrose. She swallowed the lump in her throat. Gathering her tattered dress, she descended the slope, mindful of every step. Twice, she nearly turned back. Twice, she pictured the bodies of her friends lying unavenged in the ashes of the wagon train. Her memory of that hideous morning stiffened her resolve. Truth demanded a voice, and if she was the only one who could speak, she would do it. When she reached the outlying fields near the fort, a soldier on horseback spotted her. He galloped closer, rifle across his saddle. Catherine raised both hands, calling out, I'm unarmed. Help me, I survived the Whitlock wagon train. The soldier's eyes widened. He halted, commanding her to stand still as he circled. Then he motioned for her to follow him to the gate. Two more soldiers joined them, guns at the ready. She told them her name, insisted she needed to speak with Agent Caldwell. Her ragged appearance must have lent some credence to her claim, for they escorted her inside the fort walls rather than turning her away. Within the wooden gate, Catherine's senses reeled. The pungent smell of manure, the clatter of blacksmith's tools, the swirl of uniformed men. An officer, bars on his shoulders, approached, brow creased. Madam, he barked, who are you, and what's this about Whitlock's train? Heart pounding, Catherine forced herself to stand tall. My name is Catherine Montrose. The Whitlock party was slaughtered by bandits pretending to be Indians. I can identify them. I need to speak with Caldwell. Surprise flickered across his features. We've had bulletins claiming Indians did that. Are you telling us otherwise? Indians had nothing to do with it, she snapped. Will you get the agent or not? The officer exchanged a look with one of his subordinates, then jerked his head. Wire to Captain Nichols and find Caldwell if he's in camp. Handshaking around the borrowed pistol hidden beneath her skirts, Catherine followed a soldier deeper into the fort, uncertain if she was walking toward justice or into a cage she might never leave. Catherine soon found herself in a dimly lit office, the pungent aroma of tobacco smoke filling her nostrils. A stout man in a captain's uniform leaned over a broad desk cluttered with papers. Two other officers stood by the walls, hands on their sword hilts. She sensed tension radiating from all of them as she repeated her story in a trembling but determined voice. The wagon train's route, the dawn attack, the white men disguised with feathers, the mention of, "Next time we won't be so hasty." The captain, introduced as Captain Nichols, steepled his fingers. You claim you actually saw these criminals wearing Indian attire? Yes, Catherine insisted, resisting the urge to shout. I hid while they tore through the wagons. I know what I saw. One officer, a gaunt man with a narrow mustache, huffed. The official report said the bodies were found with arrow wounds and scalps taken. She clenched her fists. They carried bows, used them. It's not difficult to replicate a scalp with a knife. They wanted your reports to blame the tribes. I've traveled with a Dakota scout who's been tracking them. He lost family to these same outlaws who raided a village, leaving white trinkets to frame the tribe. Do you see the pattern? A slight stir broke among the officers. The mustached man looked uncertain, but Captain Nichols eyed her warily. So you're telling us the savage who escorted you here is innocent? A spike of anger. He saved my life more than once. The real savages are the criminals who roam these plains, stirring hatred between settlers and tribes. If you continue chasing ghosts, more innocents die. Silence hung in the room. Then the door opened, and a lean figure with iron-gray hair stepped in. The soldier guarding the entrance announced, Agent Caldwell, sir. The newcomer wore plain clothes rather than a uniform. He studied Catherine with frank curiosity, then turned to Nichols. I hear there's a survivor from the Whitlock train with a contrary account. Nichols gestured brusquely. Yes, this is Mrs. Montrose. She claims outlaws disguised as Indians orchestrated the massacre. Agent Caldwell nodded at Catherine. I've heard rumors aligning with your story, but no proof. She pressed her lips together. I can identify the leader if I see him again. A man named Jonathan Redwood. He has a deep scar across his left cheek, a wide-brimmed black hat with a silver band. He's cunning, manipulative, and has men scattered across the region. Caldwell's mouth hardened. Redwood, I've encountered that name. He was once an army scout, went rogue. Some claim he's behind multiple stagecoach robberies and raids. Hope flared in Catherine's chest. Yes, and he's fueling hostilities. Will you help me prove it or at least investigate? There's also someone outside, Chayton Snowhawk, who can confirm. He's Dakota and can show you where Redwood's men operate. A sudden tension crackled in the room. The mustached officer blurted, You want us to let an Indian inside the fort? Are you mad? Caldwell's gaze flicked to the officer. If this Indian truly has evidence, we'd be wise to hear him. We've had enough skirmishes on false pretenses. Captain Nichols rubbed his temples. Very well, but we proceed with caution. If Redwood's men are truly out there, we can't let them slip away. Soldiers have patrolled that area, but maybe we need a targeted approach. Catherine exhaled, relief tangling with anxiety. Thank you. Before long, Caldwell made arrangements for a small patrol to ride out with Catherine. She insisted on reuniting with Chayton to prove her claims. Nichols was wary, but Caldwell's authority on Indian affairs carried weight. They settled on a plan. Catherine would show them the route, a half-dozen soldiers would accompany, and Caldwell himself would speak with Chayton in neutral ground. As the meeting concluded, Catherine found her legs shaking with an odd mixture of triumph and dread. She had broken through official skepticism, but Redwood's gang might lurk anywhere. If Redwood realized the army was investigating, he could vanish or strike first. Caldwell approached her quietly as the others filed out. You're brave to come here. Many in this fort are convinced the tribes are to blame. You realize Redwood and his men won't take kindly to you testifying, correct? She squared her shoulders. I realize that, but better I die telling the truth than live with the lie. A flicker of approval crossed his face. "We'll ride at dawn. Rest while you can." Her head spun with exhaustion as she was led to a spare bunk. The soldier who guided her offered awkward sympathy, his eyes drifting to her ragged attire. "We can find you some fresh clothes, ma'am," he said gently. She nodded, numb. Even if Redwood or his men lurked, she had to keep going. The dead demanded justice, and for the living, a chance at peace. That evening, in a cramped bunk room smelling of sweat and must, Catherine tried to scrape off layers of grime from her skin. A soldier's wife named Martha approached with a threadbare but clean dress. "It's not fancy," Martha apologized, "but it might help you feel more yourself." Catherine thanked her, touched by the kindness. After weeks in her shredded gown, wearing something less tattered felt almost shocking. But as she slipped it on, she realized how much she had changed. The sight of a modest pale blue dress did not erase the memories of blood and survival. She still felt the knife strapped to her thigh, still expected danger every time she heard an unfamiliar voice. She was trying to rest on a cot when Caldwell knocked softly, stepping inside with caution. "Good to see you looking more comfortable," he offered, settling on a rickety stool. "I wanted to hear more details about Redwood, any unique mannerisms, potential hideouts." So Catherine recounted everything she had gleaned from overhearing Redwood's men. References to an abandoned cabin near a shallow gorge, a place called Wilson's Station for selling stolen goods, repeated mocking about foolish folks crossing the plains. Caldwell listened intently, occasionally jotting notes. Outside, the fort bustled with preparations. 2 cavalry units were returning from a routine patrol. Catherine sensed a rising tension. Some soldiers eyed her suspiciously, certain she was either lying or manipulated by Dakota cunning. Caldwell, however, radiated a calm sense of purpose. She clung to that. Near midnight, a soldier came to fetch her, announcing the patrol was departing at first light. In the pale gloom, Catherine mustered her courage and followed Caldwell out to the courtyard. She swung onto a borrowed horse, suppressing a grimace as pain flared in her battered feet. Half a dozen mounted soldiers joined them, rifles glinting under flickering torches. They rode beyond the fort, crossing the open fields until they found the rocky bluff Catherine had designated as the meeting point. Dawn light seeped over the horizon as the group halted. Soldiers fanned out, watchful. Caldwell dismounted, lifting a hand to shade his eyes. A figure emerged from behind boulders, Chayton bow slung across his shoulder. 2 other Dakota men accompanied him, which sent the soldiers into a mild panic, guns rising. Caldwell barked an order to stand down, stepping forward with careful composure. Catherine's heart soared with relief, seeing Chayton alive and uninjured. She slid from her saddle, hurrying to him. "You came," she breathed. He nodded, glancing warily at the armed men. "Yes, but not alone." Caldwell introduced himself in a firm but respectful tone, letting Chayton see he carried no immediate hostility. The 2 Dakota men, Cloudstep and Red Hawk, as Catherine later learned, remained silent, scanning the soldiers for any sign of betrayal. Chayton explained Redwood's probable location, a hideout near the southwestern ridge, close to a crooked stream. "We have seen fresh tracks. Redwood's men lurk there, waiting for the right moment to raid another wagon train or settlement." Caldwell turned to Catherine. "Is this consistent with what you overheard?" She nodded. They planned to strike again soon, disguised once more to spur conflict. The tension thickened as Caldwell discussed tactics with the cavalry sergeant. Finally, a plan formed. A contingent of soldiers would approach Redwood's hideout from the east, while Chayton and his fellow scouts guided Catherine and Caldwell from the west, cutting off escape routes. The risk was high, but if successful, Redwood could be captured, forcing him to face justice. Catherine's stomach clenched. She had hoped merely testifying about Redwood's crimes would suffice. Now she found herself part of an operation to capture him, but if Redwood fled once more, no one would believe her claims. As the ad hoc alliance formed under the rising sun, Catherine realized how extraordinary it was. A few Dakota scouts, a handful of suspicious soldiers, and her, a survivor no one would have believed had she not shown up in the flesh. If they succeeded, they might avert a full-scale war fueled by lies. If they failed, Redwood would vanish, leaving more bodies in his wake. The group rode south for half the day, guided by Chayton's knowledge of hidden trails. Soldiers fanned out, trying to mask their approach. Catherine stayed close to Caldwell and Chayton, her pulse drumming an anxious rhythm. She replayed the memory of Redwood's face in her mind, that mocking grin, the silver banded hat. She wanted him to see that she had lived, that she had not remained silent. By mid-afternoon, they spotted fresh horse tracks and an abandoned camp littered with ashes. The signs pointed west, deeper into a band of hills where the crooked stream meandered through a hollow. Caldwell split the soldiers, sending 4 to flank the ridges, while the rest continued with Catherine and Chayton. The closer they got, the more Catherine's insides twisted. She glimpsed a small structure perched on a rocky shelf above the stream, a dilapidated shack with a collapsed porch roof. From behind that shack, smoke curled. Her breath caught. Redwood's hideout? They approached cautiously, dismounting to avoid betraying their presence with the clatter of hooves. The forest canopy overhead cast shifting shadows across the ground. Chayton scouted ahead, hugging the trunk of a massive pine. He waved them forward, and Catherine crept behind Caldwell, pistol clutched with trembling hands. She heard distant murmurs, saw flickers of movement near the shack. Redwood's men, at least 5 or 6, lounged among crates. A large man with a broad hat lounged on a stump, reloading a pistol. "Redwood?" Caldwell gestured for the cavalry to circle wide. "On my signal," he mouthed. Catherine's heart hammered so loudly she feared Redwood's gang would hear it. She spotted more crates behind the shack, likely stolen goods. A savage satisfaction arose. These men had no idea justice was about to descend on them. Suddenly, a twig snapped underfoot. One of Redwood's men jerked his head up. In a flash, Redwood was on his feet, hat glinting. "Who's there?" he barked, reaching for his gun. Caldwell shouted, "U.S. Army! Drop your weapons!" Soldiers burst from cover, rifles raised. Redwood's men scrambled, some diving behind crates, others returning fire. Gunshots cracked. Catherine flattened herself behind a fallen log, adrenaline surging. Redwood barked commands, cursing the sniveling bastards. Chayton loosed an arrow, striking a bandit who aimed at Caldwell. The man fell with a strangled cry. Redwood whirled, leveling a revolver toward Chayton. Catherine saw the muzzle flash. She screamed. Chayton ducked, the bullet splintering pine bark. Redwood spun again, firing at a soldier. One trooper collapsed, clutching his leg. Chaos reigned. Catherine forced herself to breathe. Redwood was pinned near the shack, bullets chipping the wood behind him. Another bandit tumbled from the porch, mortally wounded. Redwood's silver hat flashed as he dashed around the corner, presumably trying to escape. "Chayton!" Catherine shouted, pointing. They both sprinted after Redwood, heart pounding. She glimpsed Redwood vaulting over a crate, landing in a crouch near the stream. He fired blindly, forcing them to duck. 2 soldiers lunged from the flank, cornering Redwood. He snarled, realized he was trapped. In desperation, he charged the shallow water, intending to flee upstream. Catherine and Chayton gave chase, splashing through the creek. Redwood turned to shoot again, but Catherine already had her pistol raised. Her voice tore from her throat. "Stop! You murderer!" She fired. The shot grazed Redwood's shoulder. He stumbled, glaring at her with burning eyes. Recognition flickered. He recognized the dead woman who had witnessed the massacre. Fury twisted his features. Then a soldier crashed into him from behind, tackling him. They wrestled in the shallows. Redwood roared, thrashing. Another soldier joined, wrenching the revolver from Redwood's hand. The big outlaw roared curses at Catherine, calling her vile names. Dripping water, Catherine stared at Redwood's scarred face. This was the man who had laughed while her friends died. She trembled with a mix of triumph and revulsion. Chayton stood beside her, arrow still knocked, but Redwood was subdued. Cuffed, panting, beaten, Redwood spat blood. "You'll regret this," he seethed. "Men out there still loyal to me. You'll all die. And you," he growled at Catherine, "should have stayed dead." Soldiers dragged him out of the stream. Caldwell approached, face grim. "He'll hang for this if there's any justice left in the territory." Gunfire still echoed from the shack, but it soon fell silent. Redwood's men either lay dead or had fled. Catherine found herself shaking, the pistol falling from her numb fingers. It was over, or nearly so. Redwood was alive, but in chains. He could be forced to confess. No more false claims about hostile tribes. A soldier pointed out Redwood's stolen goods, wagon wheels, personal effects from the massacre, even a tattered blanket Catherine recognized from the Whitlocks. Tears stung her eyes. She turned away, feeling nauseous. She had wanted a measure of revenge, but found only sorrow. Chayton stepped near, gently touching her shoulder. His eyes held understanding. "You spoke truth," he said quietly. "Now it's heard." She looked at Redwood's broken form, half collapsed in the mud, and realized justice often came as a raw, ugly thing. But it was justice nonetheless. Redwood would face a trial, no longer able to twist events to stoke conflict. The wagons, the tribes, the innocents, maybe they would know peace at last. Back at Fort Redfield, the mood was electric. Redwood's capture was the biggest news in months. Soldiers bustled with updates, writing formal statements for the territorial authorities. The bodies of Redwood's dead men were unceremoniously buried beyond the stockade, while Redwood himself was locked in a high-walled cell under heavy guard. Caldwell wasted no time collecting testimony from Catherine and from the Dakota scouts who had participated in the raid. After the official accounts were penned, Captain Nichols offered a personal apology to Catherine. "We relied on flawed reports. If not for your bravery, we'd still be chasing shadows and wrongfully accusing tribes." Catherine accepted the apology, though she knew words alone could not undo the bloodshed. For the next few days, Catherine navigated a flurry of official business. She testified in more detail about the Whitlock Massacre, naming Redwood's men, recounting their disguises. Army scribes painstakingly recorded her statements. Caldwell, firm in his conviction, arranged for each record to include that Redwood's band, not the Dakota, were responsible. Catherine had to relive every terrifying memory, but it was necessary to clear the tribe's name. Chayton spent most of his time on the outskirts of the fort, uneasy among the uniformed men. His fellow scouts, Cloudstep and Redhawk, had already departed. He told her they were returning to inform their people that Redwood was captured. Catherine, meanwhile, was offered a private room in the fort's boarding house, a wooden structure used for visiting families. She tried to rest, but sleepless nights plagued her. Nightmares of the massacre revisiting her in brutal clarity. On the fourth afternoon after Redwood's capture, Caldwell informed Catherine that Redwood had made a full confession, presumably to bargain for his life. He admitted staging raids disguised as Indians, murdering settlers, and framing tribes. Word spread that the territorial authorities were preparing a large-scale statement exonerating the Dakota for these recent attacks. Catherine felt tears of relief sting her eyes. It would not bring back the dead, but at least future tragedies might be prevented. That same evening, a messenger arrived with news. The Dakota chief, Storm Crow, sent word acknowledging Catherine's role in exposing Redwood's deception. She was invited to visit the Dakota camp if she wished. Caldwell relayed that the tribe wanted to meet the woman whose testimony spared them the brunt of the cavalry's anger. Catherine's heart fluttered with indecision. The fort's officers encouraged her to return east. They mentioned a wagon traveling in a month or so, heading back to a larger town, but she couldn't shake the feeling that her journey west had changed her irrevocably. Sitting in a parlor again, making idle conversation, felt unthinkable. She needed purpose. That night she found Chayton near the stables, checking his horse's girth strap. He glanced up as she approached, a question in his eyes. "You leave with the next wagon east?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, searching her own heart. I'm not sure. Caldwell says your chief wants to meet me. I've come to realize there's so much I don't know about your people, your ways. Maybe I can help, learn from you, build a bridge." His expression was guarded, but a hint of warmth lit his gaze. "It will not be easy. Some in my camp lost family to men they believed were settlers. Wounds run deep." She nodded. "I know. But if there's even a small chance we can begin to mend the harm Redwood caused, I want to try." Chayton set a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Then come. I will speak for you, though the ultimate acceptance is up to them." Catherine felt a wave of both relief and nervous excitement. She had survived the wagon train massacre, exposed a ruthless outlaw, and found an unexpected ally in a Dakota scout. Now a new chapter beckoned, one in which she might walk between two worlds, forging understanding. They departed Fort Redfield at dawn, riding side by side. The soldiers saluted her with unexpected respect as she left, Caldwell offering a handshake. Redwood's trial would happen soon, but Catherine felt little need to witness it. She had done her part, and Redwood's confession had sealed his fate. As the wooden palisade receded behind them, Catherine turned her horse toward the open plains. She still wore the battered boots and the borrowed pistol strapped to her side, reminders of how harsh this land could be. Yet she sensed a profound calm blossoming within her. Freed from the shroud of lies, the truth offered a path forward. Chayton guided them northwest. Over rolling hills and wind-tossed grass, they ventured to meet Chief Storm Crow and a people Catherine had once viewed with ignorant caution. Now she realized how false narratives had stoked fear on both sides. Her presence might not magically mend all wounds, but it was a start. As the horizon stretched before them, Catherine Montrose squared her shoulders. She was no longer a victim, no longer a terrified woman fleeing ghosts of her past. She was a survivor who had confronted violence and found a voice strong enough to reveal the truth. And perhaps, in forging an alliance with the Dakota, she could help foster a future where fewer wagon trains fell to senseless ambushes, and fewer tribes were unjustly blamed for crimes they did not commit. In her pocket, she carried the small stone bear Chayton had given her, a token of resilience. The wind caressed her face, carrying the promise of renewal. There, on the endless frontier, Catherine Montrose rode onward, hand in hand with the man who had once saved her life, and whose people now welcomed her into an unfamiliar but hopeful tomorrow. Looking back, Catherine Montrose's journey was never about returning to the comfort of her old life. It was about uncovering a strength she never knew she had. From witnessing the horror of that wagon train attack to forging an alliance with a skilled Dakota scout, each obstacle tested her will. Yet in the end, not only was Redwood exposed, but so was every scheme that threatened to spark needless conflict between settlers and tribes. Today, Catherine stands at the threshold of a new life, ready to honor those she lost by building a future that bridges differences rather than deepening them. She carries with her the invaluable friendships made along the way, and the unshakable belief that truth, once revealed, can protect innocent lives. What about you? If this journey inspired or moved you, let us know in the comments. Share your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more compelling frontier tales and heartfelt discussions.